Our first plenary turns to a very practical question of how to deliver cleaner and more affordable cooking and fuel solutions at scale. Many African households, as we've heard, still rely on biomass and other unsafe fuels. I think we'll all agree that national fuel and LPG plans are therefore not only an energy issue, but also a public health and development priority. To help us explore more from vision to delivery, national fuel and LPG expansion plans, please help me welcome to moderate this conversation, broadcaster with Channel Africa, Sesakho Magadla. Please help me welcome CEO Senedi Titus Mate. Executive Secretary Ada Anibal Kraga. Interim CEO PetroSA Sesakho Magadla. And lastly, please help me welcome Head of Communications and Public Relations at PetroDec, Tamsin Donaldson. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I think we'll start with a simple provocation. I'm looking directly at the minister. He's very well known for saying, Tshepiso. So this time you've shifted it. But I'll start with a simple provocation, and you'll tell me, Minister, if you agree. We cannot industrialize, we cannot urbanize, we cannot secure healthy populations without scaling, clean cooking, and reliable fuel systems. Do you agree? Well, let's introduce you to the panel. Dr. Titus Mate, CEO of SANEDI, South African National Energy Development Institute. Anibal Kraga, Executive Secretary, African Refiners and Distributions Associations, ARDA. Sesakho Magadla, Interim CEO of PetroSA. And Tamsin Donaldson, Head of Communications and Public Relations, PetroDec. So I think the essentials are really clear. We're talking about the need for infrastructure that doesn't yet exist, investment flows that are far below our needs, market systems that are uneven, and regulatory environments that are inconsistent. So let's just first start with policy, public trust, and adoption barriers. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kraga. You have spoken about regulatory harmonization quite a lot. And I'm just wondering, what is the single biggest political or institutional barrier preventing harmonized LPG markets? And who must make the first move?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And thanks again to the African Energy Chamber for inviting me here. I think for LPG, and I always like to point out that when people say clean cooking, in Africa, we're talking LPG. Other parts of the world, they keep talking about cook stoves and all, which bioethanol, all of that. For us, it's LPG. And I think the single first thing is ensuring that there's a national priority for LPG and making it, a national priority. And when you look across Africa, given the demand that we have, given the energy growth and all of that, you don't have, I think it's only 15 to 20 countries that actually have dedicated LPG sector development plans, right? And when you do that, it's everything from fiscal policies, taxes, all of that. So actually thinking, this is where my country is going, this is where the infrastructure is required, and how do we put together an end-to-end solution that now attracts investment? Because regulation drives investment, right? And it's regulation not just over an election cycle, but over the length of the investment, right? So once you now have that in place, given where the government is trying to go, you now start to come to the next point, which is, what are the policies that will ensure we balance affordability and accessibility, okay? So it's one thing to say we want everybody to move from firewood and charcoal to LPG. But what happens if, you finally get that lady in a village, I'll use Nigeria where I'm from, in Nasarawa State in the north. She has finally thrown away her firewood and she's not using LPG. And then Russia invades Ukraine and LPG prices go through the roof and she can't afford it. So that's why I say you have to have a national LPG plan And then you now start to put in place, okay, if we're going to do that, where do we sit? Are we going to have, what are we going to put in place to attract investments in infrastructure, but then ports infrastructure for imports? And then longer term, how do we now build security of supply? In Africa, if you look around the world, usually I think it's 60% of LPG comes from the upstream, 40% comes from refining. In Africa, it's actually 85-15. So about half of our imports come from outside Africa, right? What is the question? What are the countries doing in terms of looking at their upstream? So the minister talked about there's a lot of work that's going to be done in the upstream here. What are we looking at to ensure that the LPG that we get from our upstream is actually domesticated? In Africa, for example, we produce, I believe, mostly propane, but we actually use butane. So a lot of what we produce in Africa is actually exported, and then we have to import again. So I come back to, again, what is the national is it a national priority? Is it defined? Are the regulations defined? Then you now put in place the policies that will attract investment in port infrastructure, in distribution infrastructure, and then longer term, pay-as-you-go solutions and last mile that will actually get it away from not just the urban areas, but to the peri-urban areas as well. So it's a holistic solution, end to end.
But basically what you're saying is that, intentionality leads to regulation, but if we have fragmented regulation, it's fragmented markets.
Without a doubt. No, people are not going to bring money if they're not clear that their investment, that they're clear on the rules for engagement over the duration of their investment.
Dr. Maite, would you agree with the statement that South Africa has suffered with public trust, especially when we talk about energy transition? And having said that, I'd like to ask a question. What is the thing that is most misunderstood by policymakers, just in terms of the adoption of LPG in South Africa when it comes to behavioral and cultural barriers in LPG uptake?
No, thanks, Tsepiso, for your question. Let me first deal with the issue of trust. I think you are correct. When it comes to the energy matters in South Africa, we've just come out of a very difficult period. Almost 2 to 3 years of load shedding, we're over that. And I think that has actually helped the country to gain trust in what government is doing, what state-owned entities are currently doing. We're very confident that going forward, we will not see load shedding coming back. We've just recently gazetted an IRP, Integrated Resource Plan 2025. It's a balanced plan in line with the policy of South Africa of embracing all technologies. Let me just also, I think the point was raised in the previous fire chat. South Africa is not moving away from coal. We're investing a lot of money, a lot of effort in clean coal technologies. In fact, in the IRP 2025, that has been gazetted, it is now a policy of South African government that we must research clean coal. We must spend the next 5 years proving some of the clean coal technologies. In fact, we've also included nuclear, that we need to research the promising nuclear technologies, including the small modular reactors. So I think that has actually helped to build trust with the South African public. But when it comes to clean, let me just address your question around clean cooking and clean energy. We are hoping in the next couple of hours, when the G20 declaration is finalized, clean cooking will be part of the declaration. The G20 Energy Transitions Working Group endorsed one of the outcomes. Of course, it was very difficult, but one of the outcomes that was endorsed by the G20 member states, including the AU, was that we as Africa, we must pursue clean cooking going forward. And it's got a number of pillars. And I don't want to get into the specifics, but it's basically things that we know that we must look at the policy aspect, look at the financing aspect, look at capacity development, look at the financing aspect. It's things that we know what to do. But I think it's time now to move away from plans and focus on execution.
And in doing so, there must be targeted awareness. So I'll go back to what are the things that are most misunderstood by policymakers in terms of cultural, behavioral barriers in the uptake of LPG here in South Africa?
So let me first explain what is LPG, because sometimes it's misunderstood. LPG is predominantly a combination of what they call butane and propane. You can use butane on its own, you can use propane on its own, but when you combine butane and propane to produce LPG, it's easy to handle. There's also safety aspects. If you use propane on its own, it volatilizes quickly, so it's unsafe as opposed to using LPG. So people tend to think that LPG is unsafe. It is very safe. Some of us grew up utilizing LPG, but however, you need to teach people how to handle it. Some of the containers, the cylinders that are utilized for LPG, they've got a lifespan. You cannot continuously utilize the cylinders. We have to, at some point, retire. Just like we're retiring power stations, you must also retire the assets, the cylinders that we're utilizing for LPG. So the safety aspect, sometimes it's misunderstood that this is really, it's unsafe. Don't keep this thing inside the house. Keep it outside the house. Actually, LPG is very, very safe. And that's a message that we need to be communicating as policymakers, as experts, as governments. We need to be communicating to the public that it is very, very safe. Of course, there's the affordability aspect that we can talk about at a later stage.
All right, so we will get to that. Cost perception versus reality. So let's move on now to infrastructure, supply chains, and market development. To Sesakho Magadla, let's look at PetroSA. Now, it sits at the heart of South Africa's supply chain. The part that is most likely to collapse in your mind under doubling demand, what would that be? And what are the challenges that currently exist?
I would not say that there's something that is going to collapse. I would talk to the challenges that we are dealing with to ensuring energy security, because what we understand the demand to be is just below 500,000 metric tons. And that has swung from us producing with the refineries to completely relying on imports. Hence, the minister stressed out for us, getting the refineries back online is a priority. Unfortunately, the first refinery we were trying to start getting online quickly, we would have been halfway there now. We suffered some of the competition challenges, but we're on track to try and get it back online because we need to reduce our imports. While the refinery, the work that needs to get both refineries on, back into production, which is the refinery in Mossel Bay, which was a major contributor to the LPG market in South Africa because of its gas infrastructure. And the second one is the Durban, which is the SANPC refinery. That one had the biggest storage infrastructure, which is usable, and which we would, we are in the process of making sure that that is usable before 2026 to be able to bring in the LPG to the South African market and to relieve the stress into the industry, because currently we can receive large quantities of LPG in the two ends of the country, in Richards Bay with Petrodec, as well as in Saldanha, and we do trickle some LPG through Cape Town. So you have quite a large section in the country that is not connected, and we see the infrastructure that is usable while we're rebuilding the refinery needing to be online for us to handle LPG so that we can relieve the pressure and we can be able to deliver the LPG, because once the logistics of the LPG increase, it affects the price. Secondly, also in Mossel Bay, because you do need to deal with that part of the market before it collapses, because the market in Eastern Cape and parts of north part of the Western Cape, as well as Northern Cape, is not really catered for if you are purely focusing in Saldanha, in Saldanha and Richards Bay. And I think also some of the issues I think you raised earlier with regards to LPG and the uptake in South Africa, there's a lot of uptake in LPG, especially in the urban market, because it's easily accessible. The area that we need to work in as a country is access to LPG for the deep rural areas, because you are now expecting people to travel far longer distances to access that LPG market. And remember, for energy security for us, it must be there, must be affordable, must be accessible, and must be reliable. So those are the other areas in terms of how do we engage with industry to support the last mile. And then the other pressing point, the market can really afford the LPG currently. What becomes a challenge is the canisters for moving the LPG. And that's one of the areas where we could move in. Thank you.
So what are the costs of those inefficiencies, or do we have a picture of that? Because from a government perspective, if we talk about infrastructure bottlenecks, it sometimes appears a bit vague. Is there a sense of what the cost of those inefficiencies are in the system, particularly when it comes to supply chain?
I would not give you the numbers,
Just
they're not
generally.
at the top of my head, but obviously you can see the cost of the cost in terms of not having access to LPG, because then you end up seeing people burning the less safer fuels like paraffin and wood. And you also see some of that cost also when you have, especially in winter, you have fatalities that are not as a result of fire, sometimes because of emissions. So being able to have a stable LPG infrastructure for everyone and making sure that there's access to that energy, you can see that cost not just from a financial point of view, you can also see it from a social point of view.
So it's just about, when we identify those challenges, it's just about reinforcing them and what it'll take to do that at scale and speed. So let's move now to access and affordability. Tamsin Donaldson, Petrodec, you're involved in Africa's most ambitious LPG logistics projects. I want to hear more about it. But just most importantly, tell us about what is also consistently misunderstood and what it takes to make LPG physically reachable for low-income households. We've just heard from Sesakho that there is uptake in urban areas, but not so much in rural areas.
Well, thank you for the question, and it's really great being here today having this discussion. I think one of the things that we can potentially look at here is the IEA has said in order for us within sub-Saharan Africa, in order for us to achieve universal access to clean cooking by 2040, 80 million new connections need to take place each year to clean cooking solutions. And that's 7 times the pace that we're currently doing it at. So we need to pull together as a team here, and we need to bring all solutions to the table. And one of the biggest elements that's happening throughout sub-Saharan Africa at the moment is inefficiency sitting at the point of import. So we're seeing major inefficiencies. You were asking earlier what that potentially could cost. So those inefficiencies where you have shallow harbors, you're not able to bring in a very large gas carrier, you're having to do costly ship-to-ship transfers. That's adding about 10 to 20% premium. So the IEA estimates that's adding about $100 per ton to the delivered price of LPG. You're also then bringing it in small parcels through smaller terminals, and that's adding to the end cost. So the idea here is that we as an LPG industry, we're kind of looking at ourselves like a 24-hour convenience store within Africa. We're bringing in small parcels at a much higher cost, and we need to change that view. We need to look at infrastructure that's going to allow us to bring in elements in higher volumes. And that starts with larger terminals, larger import terminals that have VLGC capabilities. And we're, as Petrodec as well, we're busy building a terminal up in Tanga in Tanzania, which is going to unlock that particular market. In South Africa, we're also looking at innovations on the along the value chain as well. We're looking at bringing in a rail system which will move LPG in larger parcels from Richards Bay to inland, and then that springboards within sub-Saharan Africa. So these are all projects that are in the pipeline, and I know that there actually is, if we have a look at the international market, there is private capital available. There are people looking to invest. We're talking about lovely enabling policies. Those are fantastic, and we do need those. But what we're seeing, and this is a pan-African problem, it actually sits at a much more practical point. I think the minister started speaking about it earlier, where we don't have a consistent permitting process. So the permitting and approvals process is a little bit too complicated. In certain countries, it's not that clear. So the ask here is, let's streamline that procedure. Let's make that more visible. Let's make that more transparent to the investors coming in. And we'll start to see the springboard happening with those large import infrastructure facilities. Annie will forgive me if I'm incorrect here. I think the IEA's target is 700 KT additional needed.
Just building on that point, I think right now, total we have is 600 KT. 2/3 of that is in Nigeria and Angola for the rest. And so to beat those targets is 700 KT. But just since I'm glad you started bringing up Pan-African, because I think when we sit in South Africa, it's a very different picture. The IEA in the same study estimates we need $37 billion worth of investment between now and 2040 for this. And that will take us essentially from us, we have, I think, 15% of the world's population, we use 1% of the LPG. These investments will take us to 8%. But the reality is, because of how far South Africa has gone, of that money, they only estimate you need about $1 billion plus here. 17 billion is going to East Africa, that you're talking about. 12 billion is estimated to go to West Africa. But these same issues happen across the continent. So we need a Pan-Africa, because this is Africa's G20. We're here in Johannesburg to support Africa because we need as much of that 37 billion to come in through the right enabling environment to actually let us get this done. But we need to ensure that we realize that the South African situation and the rest of Africa are very different. In fact, in South Africa, a lot of people use electricity for cooking. That's not the case elsewhere. So when you're talking of LPG here is an additional clean cooking alternative. Elsewhere, we're using firewood. In fact, if you come to West Africa, there's a continuous debate about who has the best jollof rice, Nigeria, Senegal. And if you ask most of the people, they will tell you the charcoal-based jollof rice is actually tastier.
Oh.
No, I'm serious. And then on the point he raised about perception, I was in Zambia, we had an LPG forum earlier this year, and someone in Zambia said, you know, if I use LPG, I hear I'll get gastroenteritis. We are laughing about it here, but that's the reality across Africa. So what we're talking about is, what is a holistic solution that will allow as much of this $37 billion show up to do what we're talking about?
Okay, so back on topic then. Let's talk about capital. You know, it can't wait for perfect conditions. Yeah. It'll follow scale, it'll follow credibility, it'll follow clarity. So Anibo, then, what are the blind spots, particularly from government's perspectives?
Well, we talked about regulation, but I think our speaker earlier from NEPAD talked about project preparation. We need to go from wish lists to actual project preparation, define scope, cost, and schedule of projects, right? And for any investments to show up, you need to have the regulation, you need to have scope, cost, and schedule. But there's another thing we're not talking about here at all. And I like to usually do this exercise anywhere I speak. Mm-hmm. And I always say, raise your hand in this room if you're going to be 40 years old or younger by 2030 in this room. No, seriously. So who's going to execute the projects? Where's the human capital who's actually going to take this 37 billion, turn it from PowerPoint and financial models into actual molecules? So in terms of what we actually need to do, we need regulations, we need project preparation. Budget is not equal to cash. That's one of the biggest issues we face between public and private sector. A lot of the times, public sector is about headlines, with all due respect. $10 billion project, what are the economics behind that? private sector is a bit more, so now a lot of the countries were merging the two. But even when you go through all of that, what do we see in an environment where you're competing for human capital? You're competing against influencers today for people to come into the industry. I'm being serious. I'm being serious. This is a fact. People make more from posting on Instagram than coming to work for PetroDec or anybody. So how do you get these people? There's no one here. So we're laughing about it, but these are actually serious issues. Because if I'm a financier and I'm going to deploy money into a project, I want to see, do I have clarity of regulation? Do I have clarity of project preparation? Of course, luckily, this LPG is an ESG compliant type thing, especially. But the fourth one I want to know is who is going, if the guy signing the contract today is retiring in 2 years, but this is a 7-year project, why do I have confidence?
I think if I may add, in terms of the capital that's required to invest into the LPG infrastructure to reduce the stress into the system, the current, as I indicated, ours is to make sure that early by 2026 we are flowing LPG in Durban. And that we're doing through collaboration and partnership to finalize the bankable feasibility study. And that is critical for us to make sure that we can secure investment. I think in relation to also the contribution made with PetroDec, having said that we have sort of a void that's about probably 1,000-kilometer radius that is not properly serviced, and looking at integrating the rail network to be able to connect Saldanha via Mossel Bay and Mossel Bay to the rest of the network. Those are areas we're looking at. In where we are sitting, we are not in a position to say how quickly we can do that. As you are well aware that our rail network was under attack by other forces. But there's collaboration beyond just the energy sector, where we need to make sure that when the rail is operational, you are able to connect the existing infrastructure that is fragmented and to able to move the product to where it's required. So I think the project preparation is important. That's one. Two, also in preparing the projects and also managing investors. If at every point you are working with an investor and you are still evaluating and developing the bankable feasibility study, everyone wants to know what is happening, not because they are interested in supporting the project. They're doing the same thing that where we could not drill the 3 wells that the minister actually indicated. What that does, it makes it difficult for investors to engage with us because they're saying, we want to invest with you, we want to comply with the regulations and the law, but we also want comfort that when we are engaging with you, we'll be treated with respect. So that goes, it's a two-way process. That enables us, the technical team, the commercial team, the socio-economic team, to do the work that is required under a protection, understanding that we all need to comply with the law, so that you don't, at the minute you start a project, you have 1,000 allegations. Then you're focusing on those allegations, not on the project. The project never really takes off. I think that's an environment that we just need to manage to make sure that those that are still interested, because they see the market as an attractive market, we now need to be responsible to manage that market. The regulations are there in place for us. We get policy support. We now also as public need to actually engage in a manner that is collaborative, that is also supportive to making sure that we can get the work that we need to do done.
All right. So I'll ask this question to both you, Titus and Tamsin, and I'll start with you, Titus, and then Tamsin will come to you. Just in terms of the state of carbon markets, what is the one financing mechanism that is underused in terms of scaling up LPG infrastructure?
Yeah, I think the first one is the green finance mechanism. It's underused. When you think of clean cooking and LPG, the biggest challenge, it's data. You need to quantify the impact. Let's say the close to 1 billion households or people in Africa that don't have access to clean cooking. If you were to target 50% of that, what does it mean in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? What does it mean in terms of energy savings? That data is not existing. So I think the first step is to create a validated database where we can quantify all these initiatives and in an integrated manner, so that when the funders want to know what is the contribution of clean cooking, LPG in particular, to achieving some of the climate change targets, we've got a credible information that you can utilize to do that. But it's a huge potential. And maybe just to also add, I think we must not forget about what is a problem statement. Majority of the people that don't have access to clean cooking are in rural areas. They are largely women. It's largely poor. They can't afford. So the governments have to, across Africa, they have to come together to come up with mechanisms in terms of how to de-risk. The investor will not invest if they don't know whether they will be able to recover their investment or not. So government, public sector, and the private sector have to work together to incentivize and maybe come up with incentives, vouchers, or whatever to subsidize the end users that have to buy this LPG, which are largely women, poor communities. They can't afford it.
Tamsin, what's your response to that? And particularly speak about gender empowerment.
Oh, this speaks to my heart. So I'm so glad that we're talking on this today. There is such great opportunity within the LPG value chain to bring in entrepreneurs, particularly female entrepreneurs. Again, the IEA estimates that by the development of the sector will bring up just under 500,000 new jobs. And it would be fantastic that last mile delivery system and the resellers, if we could engage women within that value chain, because it is the women and the girls that in particular, they're spending up to 4 hours a day gathering fuel wood and doing the cooking. They're the ones undertaking, having the most impact of that household air pollution. So if we can bring them into that value chain and we can add value, because you spoke about it earlier as well, is how do we convert those consumers? How do we take them and say to them, you've used wood for your whole life or charcoal, you must now change to this clean cooking mechanism. Those types of invested conversations are much easier had with someone from their community that can showcase the benefits to them, that can showcase that they can still keep their cultural and their heritage practices, but that we're moving to a much healthier way of cooking, a much healthier way of being. So it would be great to involve women in particular within the value chain. Just touching on the underutilized financing mechanisms as well. There's been a lot of great work done, spearheaded by the Clean Cooking Alliance, on methodology, carbon methodology. So there's the Vera, and is it the 4C methodology as well. But that's on the end use, the cylinder and the cook stove. So there's great opportunity for resellers to start accessing that financing and for us to start developing this whole value chain all the way down.
You know what? I'm going to allow you. But here's the thing. This will be part of your final.
No problem.
Okay. So while you respond, just give us your sense of if you were to take one commitment in terms of action, one reform, one investment that would help accelerate LPG access the fastest in the next 24 months, what would it be for you? And I'm asking the question to all of you, but Anbo, will start with you, and that's...
Okay. I don't know what I did this to you. The bottom line, I think it's one thing, and that's the one thing I hope that the minister and the team take to this G20. We actually have to intentionally put carbon credits as part of the LPG discussion, okay? The reality is that the greater world still thinks of LPG as a fossil fuel. So it's interesting that cleaner cook stoves qualify for carbon credits, but LPG projects themselves do not. And that's why we talked about national priorities, making sure all of this becomes part of NDCs. If you look at the countries where you've actually had a lot of uptake in LPG, India, China, Indonesia, they use subsidies. Even the countries in Africa, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, and like, well, but that's not sustainable. You have to have, so we have to have a seat at the table in terms of let's ensure that carbon credits for LPG projects actually become part of the discussion. And it's interesting that even if you do that, do you know that there are only 9 countries in Africa that actually have carbon credit mechanisms as part of policy? So even if you go and do all this work, we still can't do it. I think the countries are Nigeria, well, South Africa, kudos to you guys, Ghana, a couple of them, but only 9 countries in total. So the singular thing, in summary, because you're giving me the look again,
No, I'm listening.
is
with
that
it.
no, seriously, carbon credits for LPG, that is it's internationally proven as a subsidy mechanism to actually allow fast uptake of projects and allow us to really increase the uptake of LPG adoption at a significant level. Thank you.
Thank you. Titus, your response to that question, what would be the one action, reform, or investment that you would recommend or take to accelerate LPG access over the next 24 months?
The next 24 months, I will drive the key partners in Africa globally, including piggybacking on the agreements that we've just now reached under the G20, to create a clean cooking funding facility. Mobilize funding from the BRICS countries, mobilize funding from AU, mobilize funding from the G20, and institutionalize the facility. So all the projects that are happening across Africa can be accelerated to make sure that we reach the last mile that we spoke about.
Sesakho?
I would focus on integrating the current infrastructure that's underutilized, starting with SANPC refinery LPG storage, which is one of the largest in the country, coupled with the Mossel Bay infrastructure and the rail cargoes to be able to connect. So the biggest focus is the capital that must go to integrating those projects. There are different interest groups, different investors, but it's important from a national point of view that we have an integrated solution.
Tamsin?
So as I mentioned earlier, there is private capital and there are investors willing to invest today. It really, for us, I think if I can have just one key ask, it sits around streamlining that permitting process so that we can accelerate the development of these key import infrastructures.
Dr. Titus Maite, Hannibal Krager, Sesakho Magadla, Tamsin Donaldson, I must firstly say thank you. You have done it in 45 minutes. An amazing feat, quality conversation. Please give my panelists a warm round of applause.